Regent College. We are delighted to be together in this beautiful evening here in Vancouver, here in the West Coast. Welcome to all of you who are here with us in person. We very much appreciate your company. We are so glad that you chose to be here with us tonight. And welcome to all of you who are with us online from anywhere around the world you may be. My name is Pablo. I am a student here at Regent, and also this year's Evening Public Lecture Coordinator. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that Vancouver Regent College sits on the traditional and ceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam First Nation people. Tonight we are in for another very interesting lecture, one of the many lectures and events and resources that we continually have here at Regent. If you are already subscribed to receive email updates, you know how good it is to always be aware of what's happening here at Regent. You get the emails, you know what is happening, and you get to choose what events you want to be here with us. If you are not, now is the time. All you have to do is to grab one of these little blue cards that are all the way back to by the donations box. And you have two options. You can follow the link on the blue side, or on the white side, you can enter your name and email address, and we will register here for you in person. This is the best way to know what's happening here. You will know about events, lectures, resources, and everything that happens here at Regent. Before we start, if you have any electronic device that may produce any sound, right now is the time to put it on silent mode. The lecture tonight is so interesting that we will not like to be disrupted by any buzz or ding or ring, whatever that is. So right now is the time to put it in silent mood. And lastly, for those of you who are here with us in person, please be reminded that this lecture is being recorded and live streamed under the conditions spelled out in the public notice posted by the doors here of Chapel and of Regent College. At this time, I would like to introduce Richard Thompson. He is our Director of Advancement here at Regent, and he will be our host tonight. Richard.
Thank you, Pablo. Wow, what a great turnout on such a beautiful evening in Vancouver. I take it you all saw the advertisement for the lecture, and you saw Children of the Resurrection, Priests of the Kingdom, and you said, that's me. I guess I better show up. So welcome to all of you. We'll hear more about that from Jonathan Pennington in a moment. I will formally introduce him to all of you, but first a few announcements. The first announcement is this. One of my favorite Regent grads is on staff at Peace Portal Alliance Church, and she has brought with her tonight a significant contingent of 20 plus people from that church. So welcome, Peace Portal Alliance. So glad you're here. Trust it will be a great evening. Sure, you can applaud for them. That's okay. And a real delight to welcome Jonathan Pennington back to Regent College. This is his second time here. He was with us 2 years ago. He tells me that being in Vancouver in the summertime, he just loves it, and he loves being at Regent in the summertime. And we would say amen to both of those, would we not? Okay, there you go. Thanks. So in a moment, after I introduce Jonathan, he will lecture for about 50 minutes or so. Following that time of lecturing, we will have a question and answer period. For those who are gathered here, you will see microphones on either side of the auditorium. We ask that you make your way there to ask the question so that it is clearly heard by everyone in attendance and so that it is captured on the live stream and the recording. For those who are watching online, you can submit your questions at any time. And for those who are present with your silenced phones, you can submit a question at any time. Maybe you don't want to walk up to the microphone. And you send it to the email address questions@regent-college.edu. I believe that will appear on the screen if you're watching online. And we'll conclude our evening as close as we can to 9 o'clock. And Jonathan has graciously indicated that he'll stick around for a book signing at our bookstore. So you are welcome to go there, shop, and shop, and buy stuff, and maybe even get Jonathan to sign some of it. And we'll try and have everybody out of the building by 9:30 or so for the sake of our wonderful facilities people so they're not here too late. Well, Dr. Jonathan Pennington, we're so glad you're here. Jonathan is professor of New Testament interpretation at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. He regularly serves as a visiting professor at various schools and church-based theological institutions. Jonathan is also one of the teaching pastors at Sojourn East Church in Louisville and speaks and teaches in churches all over the United States. In Canada too? In Canada too. He preached at a church just this coming weekend, so last weekend. So I'm going to change that to say he speaks and teaches in churches all over North America. He has a BA in history, an MDiv from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and a PhD from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. He is the author of many books, including Reading the Gospels Wisely, The Sermon on the Mount and Human Flourishing, Small Preaching, that's an interesting title, and Come and See. This week, Dr. Pennington is teaching the Gospel of Matthew as part of our 2025 summer programs. I think I've spotted a couple of your students that are here tonight. How many of you are doing his course on Matthew? Wow, that's great. He must have been really good this morning that you'd want to come back and hear him tonight. We are all looking forward to hearing him tonight, and so would you join with me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Jonathan Pennington.
Thank you so much for coming out on this very beautiful night to come inside. And we appreciate that very much. Well, just to get right into it, to note that we are living in a politically polarized and tension-filled age might seem too patently obvious even to state. I mean, it's reached the point of even causing serious tension between our longtime neighborly relationship between the U.S. and Canada. I was just in a little shop just off the campus, and there was plenty of anti-Trump items, which I understand, including a hat that said, "Canada not for sale." And so these are intense times, certainly even between friendly neighbors generally. But this tension and complicated political and social issues, they cause a lot of heat and anxiety for many Christians all over the world and on both sides of this border. But it's good to pause, I think, and step back and realize a couple of things about that tension we feel in politics, and that is that first, there are always political debates and issues and worries. It's really an inevitable part of complex humans making society. And also just to sort of something I've observed in my reflections on this, that even at times like this, when there is a noticeable rise in tension and polarity, and fighting and cultural revolutions, that even those are quite cyclical, right? If you kind of look at history, it's kind of the nature of humans. And my personal, completely just anecdotal theory, at least on the United States side of it, is that it seems like about every 40 or so years, there's kind of like some kind of cultural revolution, and that creates this. I think like the 1920s, the same thing, 1960s, another one. Again in the 2000 aughts, et cetera. And now there seems to be these kind of moments of cultural revolution and shifting, and that creates a lot of tension and a lot of anxiety. But I also think, very positively, it's a great opportunity for the church to be faithful and to engage the world. And I think it's important for Christians at all times, but especially in these very intense political times, to ponder and to wrestle with how we as individuals and how the Christian church should engage in the best way culture and society and governments. And I think it's important to note that I don't think there's a single correct approach or a one-size-fits-all magic solution that applies at all times across times and locations. I think it'd be naive and unhelpful to assert that Romanian Christians during the time of the Cold War, or Roman Christians during the 5th century who were blamed for the fall of the empire, or African American Christians in the States during the Civil Rights Movement, or Chinese Christians during the Cultural Revolution, or Vancouverite Christians in 2025. I don't think all must respond in exactly the same way. Each situation requires wisdom. Nevertheless, it seems to me that we should at least seek to discern and articulate some core biblical and theological principles to guide us as we navigate our assorted locales and situations. We need, I think, a sort of Christian mere politics, or a vision for a mere Christian engagement. And this is what I'm hoping to just make a small offering towards tonight, and I'll look forward to your dialogue as well. It turns out that this kind of wrestling, how should Christians engage society and culture and government, is as old as the hills, isn't it? It's as old at least as the Jerusalem hills and the hills of Rome. During Jesus' own day, we see this great cross-pressure of tension as Jewish people sought to be faithful under very oppressive Roman rule, and they responded in a wide variety of ways, spanning from complete accommodation to Roman empire rule and Greek culture as well, to a physical separating themselves into a desert life separation, from passive resistance to assassinations and Robin Hood-style vigilante actions. And the writings of the New Testament also manifest a variety of responses to the persecutions that Christians were facing, both from the Romans and increasingly from some of the Jewish leadership as well. But early Christianity's answer to how to engage culture questions is, I think, more narrowly constrained and always nonviolent. In Jesus' teachings and through his own model of willingness to suffer unjustly and to turn the other cheek, sheathing swords rather than seething words and seeking vengeance, Christianity, as we see in the New Testament and early Christianity, navigates, I think, a very nuanced approach to existing in a very polarized and opposing world. Texts like Romans 13 that are familiar to many of us make clear that Christians should respect God ordained governments and live peaceably and be virtuous citizens by doing good, silence false accusations, and even maybe leading people to glorify God. These are Jesus' words from Matthew 5. And at the same time, Christians are engaged in a very subtle subversion of culture and society by establishing households and sub-communities within the world that are outposts of God's heavenly kingdom on earth. We can think of Jesus' dialogue with the proconsul Pilate. It hints at this. He is a powerful king, and he could rule in any moment that he wanted, but he's not of this world. We can think of Matthew's detailed household code instructions in Matthew 18, 19, and 20 that paint a picture of a very different way of inhabiting the world and community. We think of Paul's constant exhortations for people to be good Roman citizens, even in a place like Philippi, that are resourced by their awareness that they're actually citizens also of a heavenly commonwealth. And we can think of Luke's writings in his gospel and in Acts that engage in a very sophisticated subversion of Roman culture by showing that the true kurios, the true Caesar, the true emperor, is actually Jesus, and the real epicenter of world power is not Rome, but Jerusalem. Now, if you fast forward 1,800 plus years to the 20th century West, where the Christian heritage has been incalculably influential, and we see various analyses and suggestions of how Christians should engage culture. So, for example, we can think of people like, famously, the Yale theologian Richard Niebuhr in his 1951 book, Christ and Culture, that 75 years later is still a very influential volume. And Niebuhr provides clarity to a very complex issue of how do Christians engage culture and society by providing a memorable taxonomy. Some of you are maybe familiar with it, some of you are not, where he gives these categories of Christ against culture as one option, Christ of culture, a kind of a blending in completely, and Christ above culture, the latter of which he recommends. If you fast forward a little bit beyond that, to more recent decades, we meet people like Chuck Colson and Andy Crouch and James Davison Hunter. Some of these names are familiar to you, maybe some are not. Chuck Colson, you may know, had a major impact on neo-evangelicalism of the 1980s and 90s, especially in the States. After serving as the special legal counsel to President Nixon and then ending up in prison because of his involvement in Watergate through reading C.S. Lewis, Colson experienced a radical conversion after reading Mere Christianity, and over the next 30 years, he used his very formidable intellect and energy to author over 30 books and to create ministries, and especially to do a lot of good in prison ministry, starting Prison Fellowship, and then later the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. And in line with a lot of modern evangelical approaches, the Colson Center has focused on education as the way to engage culture, seeking to perpetuate Christian values in society through worldview training, through a daily radio broadcast and video courses and conferences, etc., and a fellowship program of curated readings. The goal is to help Christians engage culture by thinking, and really thinking for Colson and his disciples is the operative world. If we were to ask Colson and his associates, how do you engage the world as Christians? I think their answer would be, again, worldview education. We change minds with truth that then transforms individual hearts and lives. Fast forward a little bit more, we meet a man named Andy Crouch. Some of you are maybe familiar with him, a vibrant Christian intellectual who translates his insights, I think, very effectively to a broader audience. And over the last 25 years, he's done so with InterVarsity, as a campus worker at Harvard, as an editor for evangelical publications such as Christianity Today, the author of many influential and interesting books. And in his book, Culture Making, Recovering Our Creative Calling, he speaks also to this issue of how do Christians engage culture. And Crouch observes that many Christians have actually argued along the lines of Colson, namely that Christians' task is to critique unbiblical worldviews and instead adopt a different vision. The assumption, Crouch points out, is that the Christian worldview, if you get people to think correctly, will result in personal and societal change. But Crouch argues instead that this is really insufficient because it belies a misunderstanding of what culture is, because culture isn't merely shaped by thinking differently. Instead, quote, he says, the only way to create culture is to create more of it. That is, to be engaged in making and doing good in the world around us. This is how Christians should engage culture, Crouch argues, by creating more good culture. So Colson tells us to think more clearly. Crouch invites us to create more beautifully. What if we ask the question to this fourth person I've listed here, James Davison Hunter? Hunter, for over 40 years, has taught and written extensively on the relationship of religion to society as a sociologist, and particularly on the problem of meaning and moral order in a time of political and cultural change in American life. That's a quote from him. In 2010, after years of astute analysis as a professor at UVA and various things, Hunter offered his vision for Christianity engaged in the world with really what is a stunning book that I highly recommend. It's called To Change the World: The Irony, Tragedy, and Possibility of Christianity in the Late Modern World. After analyzing other models, very similar to what I'm doing here, that Christians have adopted for cultural engagement, and he does include Colson and Crouch and others such as the Neo-Anabaptists, some of you are from that tradition, Hunter suggests that these approaches have ironically been counterproductive to Christianity's engagement with the world. Because he says all these approaches have actually ironically made our moral and social problems worse. Instead, he argues Christians should engage society with what he calls, and I do really love this phrase, a faithful presence. This is both individual and institutional, and it affects relationships as well as spheres of social life. So, how then should we live? Well, I believe each of these offerings has insight and has benefit. I do think Hunter's work is the most comprehensive and compelling of these. It's rooted, as it is, in both an astute sociological analysis and a rich theological tradition. But is there more that we could say? And can we say it maybe more succinctly and maybe rooted more explicitly in some biblical and theological traditions? That's what I want to just briefly offer some ideas for you about. But before offering my own kind of constructive approach, while appreciating all of those, just to say this is not a scorched earth approach, like all those people are horrible or something. Quite often, I think quite the opposite. I think there's a lot of good in all of them, but I'm going to try to offer some biblical and theological concepts that go a little bit more into that. But before doing that, I think it's sometimes helpful to think about what are some bad answers? What are some bad answers to how Christians should engage culture? And so I want to give you a few here, if I get it to move here. So here are some bad answers, and I give them to you, because I am a preacher as well, as 4 W's. The first bad answer, engaging culture as a warrior. That is, seeing ourselves primarily as enemies of culture. Because I think the problem with this is that it makes real people abstractions rather than real neighbors. It's an adversarial attitude toward the world and institutions. And I want to be clear, there is a time and a place for a prophetic voice, for sure. And there is a time and a place for defending truth and defending institutions and standing up. But I really don't think a warrior mode is a sustainable way of inhabiting the world for your own health. A second, worriers, right? This is a way of approaching culture that is just focused on, panicking, basically. And I understand things feel like the ground is moving underneath us all the time on very moral and economic and all kinds of issues. But I just want to say, nothing is sustainable in our lives if we're motivated primarily by anxiety. Anxiety has a place, right? There's a good kind of worry. You can worry legitimately about things, but it's not a sustainable way of health to give yourself to being a worrier. Another one is being a whiner, right? And this is kind of related to others, that you just kind of, your Christianity becomes that your public laments, whether it's on social media or other places, and also especially this whining and longing for some imagined but unreal golden era when everything was better, right? Guess what? there has never been a time when everything was great, right? This idea that we just need to repristinate the past and find this golden era, it did not exist. Everybody in every era has been convinced that there were problems in their era. And so there's no need to just whine. And then the fourth one, if I can make up a word, whiners, and another kind of whiner. And what I mean by this is those who just kind of say, well, I'm just going to escape. Maybe it's into wine, maybe it's into something else, but whatever it is, the idea of just like, I can't handle this, it's too stressful, it's too anxiety causing, so I'm just going to tap out, right? Well, I think the problem with all four of these bad ways to approach culture as a lifestyle is that whatever we give our attention to and however we learn to inhabit the world, that will shape us to be a certain kind of people, right? And if we give ourselves to being warriors, we adopt that as our main posture. If we give ourselves to worrying, to whining, or whining of the other sort, that will shape us. And I don't think any of these are going to be, again, sustainable for a disciple of Jesus. In fact, one of my key life principles that I've been thinking about for several years now is that the degree to which our lives are energized by what we're opposed to is the degree to which we're unhealthy. Let that sink in. The degree to which our lives are energized by what's making us angry, what's making us upset, is the degree to which we're unhealthy. That's not how we're designed. We're not designed primarily to be critiquers, right? And I'll come back to this here in a minute. So, what are some good answers? How do we seek the welfare of the city, as Jeremiah 29:7 says? How do we find ourselves where we find ourselves providentially placed by God? How does a disciple of Christ follow Jesus' own model of being salt and light in the world, such that, as Jesus says, people may see your good deeds and glorify your Father who is in heaven? What does it look like for Christians to, quote, do whatever is good in relationship to the world and be peaceable and considerate, Titus 3:1-2? Well, I want to offer a couple of answers. One more briefly here is that I think a common one that is good to remember is the phrase from Jesus himself where he says to be in the world but not of it. Let me just read. It's good to get these words in our ears again from Jesus' last night with his disciples as recorded by John. In John 17, he speaks of their ongoing relationship and future relationship with the world by saying this, that I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. So sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake, I consecrate myself, that they also may be consecrated or sanctified in truth. So this is this phrase that we've come to use that is helpful, to be in the world but not of it. And of course, we can fall off the knife edge either side. We can be so disengaged with the world that we fail to do this, or we can be so like the world that we're in the world and we're also of it. And this is this nuanced space that Jesus is encouraging his disciples to be part of. Not being of the world doesn't mean we hate the world or see ourselves as not integrally part of it. We're still part of it, but rather that our primary identity, if for those who are Christians, our primary vision, our worldview, our habits are shaped by the coming world reality, a different reality that's yet to come. But the main idea I want to really give you tonight is from another book, and this is from Peter's first epistle, and this wonderful idea of a kingdom of priests. And I just want to read for you these verses. They may be familiar to you, they may not. But in 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 1, Peter says this. So, and he's facing intense persecution, intense polarization in society. He says, so, put away all malice, put away all deceit, all hypocrisy, all envy, all slander. And like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up to salvation, if indeed you've tasted that the Lord is good. And as you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for this purpose, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious, but whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, there it is again, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now all of those in Christ, of every tongue, tribe, nation, race, once you were not a people who had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul, and keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. This language of the church of Christ being a royal priesthood and a kingdom of priests is language that I haven't really heard the church adopt very much, at least not in my traditions in my 37 years or so of being a Christian. Maybe for you, but I have not seen this as a very widespread way of talking. It's based, of course, on maybe it's not of course, but it is based on the original commissioning when God took the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were not a people themselves. They were all Semitic descendants who were slaves in Egypt of disparate tribes who didn't even get along with each other and spoke different dialects, etc. And he brought them through the Exodus, through the waters, and into the wilderness. And in Exodus 19, then, he makes them a nation for the first time, makes them a one people. They were not a one people before that. They were all just disparate descendants. They become a nation, and they are described there in Exodus 19 as a kingdom of priests. This is exactly what Peter is quoting and is now saying is fulfilled in the church. And we are built as a house, we are a people, we are a nation for the purpose of being a holy priesthood, a royal priesthood, a kingdom of priests. And so it's interesting to ask, what does a priest do? Why this metaphor? Why this image? Well, a priest is one who stands for God. A priest is one who proclaims and teaches who God is truly. A priest is one who leads and models worshiping God truly. A priest is one who instructs. A priest is one who sacrifices. And if you bring in Romans 12 here, then our own lives become a living sacrifice. And a priest is one who blesses. That's what a priest does. And so this vision of being a kingdom of priests, a household of people who are called from every tongue, tribe, and nation, whose engagement with the world is one of blessing. What a beautiful picture that I think in many of our traditions we have lost. And so I want to unpack what would this being a kingdom of priests look like with a metaphor and with an acronym. Two of my very favorite things, right up there with Venn diagrams. Those are some of my, and pie charts. Those are some of my four favorite things. So if I were to sing, these are my favorite things: Venn diagrams, pie charts, metaphors, and acronyms. But I'm going to give you two of those four, a metaphor and an acronym. And the metaphor is the idea of priests as terraformers, okay? Now, I always have to give this important qualification. My literary agent and my wife do not like this idea, right? Because, not the idea, but they find that the word terraforming is very confusing, and they are very wise to say, if you want to sell a book, do not put that in the title. They're probably right. But this is a book I'm working on. We'll see. You tell me if you like this word or not. But what is terraforming? Well, terra is the Latin word, as many of you may know, for earth or ground. And we use it in a lot of English words, actually, that you may or may not have made the connection to. So terrestrials or extraterrestrials, right? Terrarium, terracotta, right? Terra incognito, terra nova, and maybe one you haven't thought of, interment. When you put a body into the ground, that's inter, that terra is from that as well. And it's an odd word, I know, but it's actually much on my mind because our family are big game players. And one of our very complicated games that we love to play, a multi-hour kind of board game, is called Terraforming Mars. Any other nerds in here? Terraforming Mars? Okay, you can admit yourself? Yeah, we'll play later, okay? So Terraforming Mars is this wonderful, complicated board game where it's got a whole narrative to it, but the idea is, what would it take to make Mars habitable by humans? Okay? And that's getting at this idea of terraforming. It's forming a place, a planet or a space, to make it habitable for humans. And so this is a word that is much on my mind because we play this game a lot. But the idea goes back much farther. As early as 1961, the astronomer Carl Sagan proposed the planetary re-engineering of Venus and then later of Mars. And starting in the 1970s, NASA began doing research into the feasibility and variety of conferences and academic articles and books exploring the topic. And there's a branch of NASA called the Terraforming Division that is all dedicated to what would it take to terraform the moon and or terraform Mars. Now, as often happens, science fiction precedes science. And so if you go back into the early 20th century and even the late 19th century, think of like H.G. Wells and others, there begins to be a discussion of this idea that is even preceding the actual scientific discussion of it. The War of the Worlds talks about xenoterraforming, right? Which is of aliens making the earth comparable or inhabitable for them, right? So that's the opposite of the xenoterraforming, foreign terraforming. In the world of Star Trek, right, which some of you may be into or not, two of the popular movie spin-offs that from the 80s or 90s center around the ability to terraform a planet. In the famous Wrath of Khan, any Star Trek fans here, right? The Federation, very interestingly, develops a device they call the Genesis device, which is a technology that can transform dead matter into a place habitable by humans, turn it into a Class M planet, as they would call it. And what happens is the tyrant Khan steals the device and eventually activates us on a lifeless planet even as he dies. And then in the sequel to that, called The Search for Spock, this terraformed planet, now called Genesis, is fertile and abundant, and its fecundity even resurrects the character Spock, whose body had been buried there as the planet was being terraformed. Now, Star Trek's branding of this terraforming technology as the Genesis device is obviously testimony to the great influence of the Judeo-Christian understanding of the cosmos, but the countless other stories that use this idea can also be interpreted through a biblical lens of humans' natural tendency to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it for good or for bad, extended beyond this earth to the countless other planets in the universe. Now, I've become fascinated with this metaphor, this idea of terraforming, to cast a vision for how Christians might inhabit the world as a kingdom of priests, how we might be involved in the consummation of God's kingdom on the earth, terraforming as a way of thinking about what it means to be a kingdom of priests. And in fact, I want to play for a moment on this idea of terraforming in two ways that are organically connected. The Latin word terra, again, refers to the earth or the ground, the place of human habitation and cultivation. And terraforming, I think, is a great way to ponder this idea of priesthood, because according to Holy Scripture, humanity is not only given responsibility and call to virtuous dominion over the earth, we are also of the earth. The account of creation in Genesis notes with specificity how the creation of humanity came about. Quote, "The Lord formed man out of dust," in the Latin terra, from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature, Genesis 2:7, who is then placed in the Garden of Delights, the Garden of Eden, to work and keep it, Genesis 2:15. In other words, not only is humanity given the role of terraforming, humans are by their nature terraformed. They are made from the earth. We are made from the earth itself. Humans are unique among the creatures as being a combination of earth and God's own breath. And this is where it gets interesting. Because in Hebrew and in Latin, we see this same play between the words for earth and humanity. As you may know, the Hebrew Adama is where we get Adam, and the Latin hum or homo from homos is where we get Homo sapiens. There is a strong and intentional connection between the words human, humus, not hummus, right? As much as I love hummus, there's no etymological connection, but humus, which is this very rich soil on the top, meaning earth or ground. In fact, as Douglas Kindishi notes, the word human comes from the Latin word humus, meaning earth or ground. And then he goes on to quote Richard Rohr, saying, being human means acknowledging that we're made from the earth and will return to the earth. We are earth that has come to consciousness, and then we return to where we started in the heart of God, and everything in between is a school of love. Very Richard Rohr way of saying it. Closer to home, Eugene Peterson put it this way: the Latin word humus, soil, earth, and homo, human being, have a common derivation from which we also get our word humble. This is the Genesis origin of who we are, dust. Dust that the Lord God used to make us a human being. And if we cultivate, Peterson goes on to say, a lively sense of our origin and nurture a sense of continuity with it, who knows, we may also acquire humility. Now, returning to Genesis, our terraformedness is reiterated after the fall by the words God speaks to Adam, Genesis 3:19, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, the earth, terra. From out of it you were taken, for you are earth, ground, Adama, terra, and to earth, ground, Adama, terra, you shall return. Now here's the really amazing and important thing to remember. The great creation mandate for Adam and Eve to attend to and to care for, to nurture, to develop and expand the Garden of Eden, which is a terraforming work, that is at the core of the entire Judeo-Christian vision of the world. And note that the Great Commission mandate, which is Matthew 28 and becomes central to Jesus' teaching to make disciples of all nations, in no way negates or nullifies this fundamental human vocation and occupation. Jesus' call to make disciples and to build communities of disciples is the means by which the creation mandate is now fulfilled, because God himself has become terra through the incarnation, enabling and empowering us to re-engage with his own breath, his spirit, the terraforming work. Adam was a priest. He was the priest over the earth. And now through the second and perfect Adam, we can be as well. The work of God in the world through Jesus is the re-terraforming of humanity into the image of Christ, who is the exact representation of God, and in whose image we were made, but have now been scarred and marred and cracked. We are cracked icons in need of repair, jars and lumps of clay that our gracious sculptor is reshaping into something beautiful on the wheel of our lives. So here's the vision. As we terrestrials are being re-terraformed into the image of God, we ourselves re-engage in the ongoing and original call upon the lives of humans to be Adamic and Evish terraformers, which itself is a priestly work. And this leads right to my second point, and this is the acronym. So I've said the big idea of how we can engage the world is a kingdom of priests, working out through the foundational metaphor of being terraformed and then engaging in terraforming. And drilling down a bit into this terraforming priestly work, I want to give you an acronym that I have come to call bit by bit. And these three moves of how to do this terraforming work are not mutually exclusive, nor are they purely sequential. There's a circle of these, but I just give them to you because bit is better than BTI, I guess, or TIB or something. Bit seems to work better, right? So what are the three things? Build beautiful things, invite people into kingdom life, and tell a better story. To be a terraforming kingdom of priests, individually and corporately, is first to be people who build beautiful things. This goes back to Genesis 1 and 2 again, that humans are commissioned to be gardeners and cultivators and expanders and developers. The world as made by God is beautiful. Eden is a place of delights. You can look at Psalm 104, so many places. And as God's creatures, unique as his image bearers, we are meant to make manifest that same beauty. We never create ex nihilo like God does, but we do create as creatures. We are, as my friend Jason Meyer has pointed out, we are like semiconductors, which has been cleverly called teaching sand to think, which is a really interesting definition of what semiconductors do, teaching sand to think, and that is what we do as well. And for me, one of the things that is, with my 6 kids and a lot of time we have together, they pick up on phrases I've said and, mostly make fun of me for them. But they'll remember them when I'm dead, I'm sure. But one of them is that I love to say all the time that my daughter even made a shirt of for me is, "Way to go, humanity." And I don't mean that snarkily. That is something I say all the time because I love to look around and just see all that God has enabled humans to do. Just look in this room, right? I mean, think of all that goes into to make that chair. Millennia of learning to mine and refine metals and to shape them and to paint them. How to turn wood into something practical for that desktop. How to build screws that we can use universally. You start thinking about, you just look around. There's not only the natural beauty that's amazing, but humans are amazing. Right? I mean, humans build amazing things because we're made in the image of God. We're doing this kind of work. And I love to just look around and say, way to go, humanity. This is great, right? I always think of the great Christian artist Rich Mullins, who many of you probably know. He said in one of his later songs before he died, he said, "There's so much beauty around me, and I just have 2 eyes to see, so I'll keep looking." Friends, what a beautiful way to engage the world. Not as whiners and complainers and worriers and warriors, but looking at the world as a place of beauty and contributing to that beauty as fundamental to the call upon humanity from Genesis 1 and 2 as well. We are designed to be builders. We are designed to be cultivators. We're not designed to be cynics. We're not designed to be destroyers. We're not designed to be withdrawers out of anxiety. Again, there's a time and a place for all those things, but the fundamental truth about humans is that we're made to be builders of beautiful things. And I think that's this primary place that we start. And then what does that look like also? It looks like inviting people into kingdom life. My area of study for the last 25 years has been the Gospels. It's a great joy. And the thing I've learned about the Gospels is that what Christianity is an invitation to learn to see and be in the world in the ways that accord with God's coming kingdom. And the ministry and the word that marks all my ministry and my teaching and in my pastoring is the word invitation. I'm never trying to coerce anybody. I'm never trying to shame people or guilt people or put a bunch of duty on people. Instead, I think following Jesus' own way, inviting people to come and see, to come and taste and see that the Lord is good. Come and follow. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Jesus is constantly inviting people on the basis of our own greater good to come and follow and follow in his ways. And in the following, we will come to see their goodness. Come and taste and see that the Lord is good. Again, what is the gospel? The gospel is the message that God has come into the world through the incarnation to reboot humanity, to re-terraform us into the image of God in Christ so that we might experience true human flourishing and shalom and thereby glorify God as well. So the message of Christianity is an invitation to come and be terraformed, to come into the kingdom and adopt another way of inhabiting the world. And finally, most briefly, tell a better story. Christianity is not primarily a set of doctrines, though there are doctrines. It's not primarily a set of morals, although there are morals. It's primarily a story, the true story of the world. And that is how we are made. We are story people. We are motivated all by a vision of the good life. No matter how foolishly we might try to get it or how naive we are about it, no one has to be taught to desire the good life, to desire happiness. The question is, what story is going to drive your vision for pursuing life? And I think that Christianity's offering to the world is an offering of telling a true story that is comprehensive, that is cohesive, that is beautiful, that is invitational. And I'd recommend to you a couple of books. My good friend Josh Chautreau, another professor, who in his book, Telling a Better Story, does a great job with this, and also a very highly regarded book on Augustine called The Augustine Way, which he unpacks some of these ideas as well. I think of Telling a Better Story as like a model home in an undeveloped subdivision. That you go into a model home and it enables you to picture what your life could be like in something that has not yet been fully built yet. This is what Christianity is offering to you and what we're offering to the world. So how do you do this as we wrap things up here? Well, we do it with what I call eat.local. And I had to put up here one of my very favorite t-shirts. This touches me deeply. I love ironic t-shirts. That's the fifth thing I love, ironic t-shirts. And this is a very funny one. But I've kind of riffing on this eat locals in terms of, instead with this my own version of it, to eat period, local period. And what I mean by this is you and I are what we eat. And God is calling us to bit by bit, not bite by bite. Being present to our limited embodiment, being present to this place, this moment, this person, being a non-anxious presence in the world is this beautiful way of being local. And the idea of eat, period, local, period, is, friends, what we need to do, if you're a person of Christian faith, is to be involved in the church and to eat of the goodness of God, to come and taste and see that the Lord is good. Eat of the table of the Lord, eat of the fellowship that he provides, eat of the goodness of Holy Scripture and the way it shapes us, and then turn and serve locally. This is what I call a radically local nap, a radically local, non-anxious presence, right? I was just messaging with Michael Ware. I don't know if you know Michael Ware. He's written some great things, including a wonderful book called The Spirit of Our Politics. And he, leaning on some work of others, points out this really interesting statistic that there's an inversely correlative relationship between people who are deeply involved in being upset about national issues, and especially on social media. There's an inversely correlative relationship between the people that are all worked up about national issues and their involvement in their local community. Did you catch that? That the more worked up people are about national issues, there's a direct correlation inversely, the less those people are involved in actually serving locally. And likewise, when people are deeply involved in serving in their local communities, It's not that there's never a time to raise national issues. I'm not saying that. Of course, there are. There are things we should stand up for. But when you're deeply involved in actually loving your neighbor and serving locally, it takes a lot of the edge off of the worked upness. And when you give yourself, when you and I give ourselves to being worked up about issues and spouting off about them, that usually results in not much energy to actually love your neighbor. That's a shocking statistic. I mean, it actually makes total sense as you say it, but it's a very sobering statistic. And so how do you do this? Well, you partake of the things of God, you turn and serve locally. And one of the people that I've really enjoyed who've thought about this a lot is from the Anabaptist tradition, Alan Kreider. Some of you may have run across his work, The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. And Kreider asks the crucial question, how in the world did this tiny Jewish-based sect of Christianity not only survive the mighty and oppressive Roman Empire that had all the power, how did it not only survive it, but within a few centuries converted the empire into being technically Christian? How did it go on to thrive, Christianity, and to transform, eventually take over the empire? His answer is brilliant and beautiful and insightful. He says a big part of the reason why Christianity was able to influence and transform culture over time was because it inculcated what he calls a culture of patience. Through inviting people into church, inviting people into a life of teaching and worship, into habits of service to society, in helping the poor and starting hospitals and taking good care of women and children and widows, in sharing wealth and nonviolent ethics, Christianity, he says, created a yeasty, fermenting culture that over time spread like friendship bread and like a mustard seed that becomes a tree. This is this wonderful idea of a non-anxious kingdom of priests. And I forgot to say, there's one other part of this bit by bit, and that is that the bit by bit is build beautiful things, invite people in the kingdom life, tell a better story. But by bit, I mean by that an incrementalism. It's 1,000 little small choices of being kind and of serving and showing up and being a non-anxious presence. Great change happens bit by bit. And then my final, wrapping this up here, I've said that already. My wife always says, don't say you're about to wrap it up when you're not about to wrap it up. I have just 2 more points, I guess. And this is first the return briefly to this terroir, or this terra idea, with one more terra word that some of you know, and that's terroir. What is terroir? Sorry for my bad French pronunciation, probably. What is terroir? Terroir is this word that you can't really translate very easily into English, but to get at it, it's what makes the wide variety of wines, for example, different from each other. It's what makes flour, that is F-L-O-U-R, different. It's what makes coffee beans different. Terroir is this idea of the combination of climate and soil, pH level, the terrain, the amount of rainfall, the amount of drainage, the tradition. And here's the idea that, as you may know, you could plant a grapevine or a coffee plant that's exactly genetically the same in a different place. And even though it's genetically the same variety of grape or the same variety of coffee, cherry, that based not on the genetics, but on the terroir, this combination of pH balance and how much rain it got, how much sun it gets, the color and the taste and the smell and the volume and the flavors of that grape or that coffee bean and the wine and the coffee that it produces will vary, not because of the genetics, but because of the terroir. I think that's a beautiful analogy for the church's life in the world. Orthodox Christianity, confessional Christianity, is the same genetically across time and space. It has the same convictions, but it is going to look and taste and smell and feel different in the million different places it's planted. And this is yet another beautiful idea of this terra, that This is what a convictional church looks like in Idaho or Virginia Beach or British Columbia or Paris, France, or Rome, Italy, or Rome, Georgia, is going to look very different, and that's okay, even with the same genetics. And now, truly, finally, to my last word. I entitled this lecture, Children of the Resurrection, Priests of the Kingdom. But I haven't said anything yet about that first phrase. And to conclude, I just want to return to where I started with the particularly tense religious and social and political situation that Jesus found himself in during the last week of his earthly life in Jerusalem. You may recall the stories from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Jesus is publicly challenged by the Jewish authorities in Jerusalem. They're seeking to shame him. They're seeking to trap him, to discredit him with the crowds, to get him in trouble with the Roman Empire. And the first question they ask him is one of the most famous, kind of the classic texts to address this question of how does Christianity engage culture, and it's the question of the coin. You probably remember this, where they show him a coin and ask him, should you pay taxes to Caesar or not? And don't have time to get into all the background of this, but you should just know that coins were a very, very important part of Roman propaganda. The whole study of numismatics is very interesting, how coins were minted for all different kinds of battles and emperors doing things. And the coins in Jesus' day, we have a lot of them. And do you know what they said? They said, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. So it's a claim for his divinity. And then on the other side, it said, Son of God, and it had the epigraphs, Son of God and High Priest, Pontificus Maximus, right? So those coins were very idolatrous and very opposite to God. And of course, they think they've got Jesus trapped, right? And then he gives this amazing answer, render to Caesar what's Caesar, render to God what's God's. Well, the story, picking up Luke's account of it, that happens right after this, is that the Sadducees sadly see how well Jesus has answered the Pharisees, and so they come forward with their own question. And Luke and Matthew and others tell us that this philosophical school of the Jewish people did not believe in this newfangled idea of a resurrection. Maybe they saw it as not supported by Moses. Maybe they understood the dangerous, empowering idea that if you start telling the masses that there's a future resurrection age, that could create, political upheaval and even martyrdom, which is exactly what happens. And they're people in power. They don't want society to change. Maybe the Sadducees, as educated, wealthy leaders in society, they saw this belief in a resurrection age as simply dumb and childish and below them, the opiate of the uneducated masses. So they come to Jesus and ask him this entrapping question that's just kind of ridiculous. Like, there's this woman who has 7 husbands, whose husband will she be in the resurrection age? Jesus gives this really effective answer. But what I just want to highlight is this delicious little phrase that when I was preaching through that, I'd never paid attention to it until I was preaching through it a few months ago. In Luke 20, verse 36, he speaks about people being the children of the resurrection, or the children of the resurrection age. And here's my point to cinch all these many ideas together. The reason, friends, that we don't have to get worked up about politics, the reason we can maintain a patient, ferment relationship to governments and to culture, the reason we can live as a non-anxious kingdom of priests in the world is because of the reality of a resurrection age to come. The reality that we are actually children of a resurrection age that is coming into the world through Jesus. We are energized and resourced and protected and guided by the resurrected one who makes his followers children of the resurrection, which means we can operate in the world, engaging it, but operating in the world with freedom. Politics and governments matter. They affect our lives. Good laws and good policies are good for all of society, and in a deeper sense, they don't really matter. I imagine you've heard the old saying that some people are so heavenly minded that they do no earthly good. That's certainly a real danger, but I think the opposite problem The opposite is a potential real problem too. That some of us can be so earthly focused and anxious that it reveals that we've forgotten that this is not the end game. That this age is passing away, and as God is guaranteed that he's going to set the world to right. And I think, friends, that true hope in a resurrection age frees us up, even as it freed Jesus up, to relate to governments and to relate to cultures of the world without the need to constantly critique and manipulate everything, because that hope drives out fear. I love the clever insight that Miroslav Volf makes, that rather than following the nonviolent vision of Martin Luther King's "I have a dream" speech, many Christians instead engage the world with a "I have a complaint" speech. Political and cultural matter, and culture matters, and there are times when we do need to take a stand, and we definitely need to vote, and it's okay to speak out, and we understand things that accord with the kingdom of God. But we need to do this from a non-anxious place of priestly centeredness that is rooted in our identity as children of a resurrection age. So I leave you with this question. How would our habits, how would your attitudes be affected if you and I rediscovered our role as a kingdom of priests in the world and as people whose identity is first to last as children of a resurrection age? I think it would mean we could be free from a lot of anxiety. We could be free from a lot of need to control outcomes. We could be free from fighting with each other in the world and instead show up to bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. You cannot overstate the importance of that firm belief in the resurrection age. So bless you. Thank you for that. We will now turn to a question and answer time, or maybe we can just have nap time, meaning the non-anxious presence. Again, microphones located on either side of the auditorium. That's where you should walk to if you wish to ask a question out loud. And depending on our time this evening and the number of people lined up, if you have a question and after Jonathan has answered it, if you have a follow-up question, we may permit that, but let's restrict our questions to 2 at the maximum to allow the most. And again, online, questions at regent-college.edu. Let me start our nap time, Jonathan. Are there practices and habits that you have sought to cultivate in the last few years of your life so that you can be this non-anxious presence, whether it's your non-anxious presence in your home, in your school, at your church, in the community? Are there just 2 or 3 habits or practices that you might share with us that would help us to be better nappers?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, what I'll share is not really revolutionary, but it is the small things, isn't it? And for me, I am really committed, not in a kind of aggressive way or something, but to really not having my phone out when I'm talking to people. And just to really be present to people at the individual level. And it's remarkable what an effect that has on you and on the other people, right? And it's because attention is love, right? Attention is love. That when we just give our undivided attention to someone, that is the deepest sense of love. So that's the primary, the easiest thing to do at just every interaction, just be present to the people. And so my kind of my daily mantra is, I want to be present to this person, to this place, to this moment. So whatever I'm doing, I just try to practice being present to this person, to this place, this moment, and resist the thinking about something else and being distracted in other things, and just say, this is the moment I have with this person at this place, and I'm just going to be present to that. So that's the kind of basic thing I try to do.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask you now to be fully present to this woman and her question.
I got you.
Thank you. I appreciate what you've shared, although I was not on board with it. One of
Okay,
the things
sorry.
that threw me off board in the beginning
Okay.
was the comparison of the government at the time of Jesus, which I believe at that time there was no choice in government.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I felt that was kind of a leap from that to nowadays when we do have choice in government. And I didn't feel a comment there in terms of responsibility and accountability, which as the Christians,
Yeah.
when we are part of a country where there's oppression, and I know this happens in quite a few countries, what is the role of Christians in terms of oppressive governments where there is some kind of balance in what you're saying in terms of the goodness, the joy that we have, that we want to share, and yet there is a sense of accountability which I believe we are given as well in positive ways as Christians, and that we need to stand up. That's one comment.
Yeah, thank you.
The overall ride of what I felt, as you were saying, and I tried to suppress this, but I did feel that one of the messages is that we should all be making daisy chains. As I come from the Jesus Revolution age and out of the hippie era, where we had the choice of commune living or the Gospels on the streets where everyone was on their streets of the downtown area.
Yeah.
And one of the things we were always very cautious of is the daisy chain makers.
Yeah.
That where I believe we do, as you've said, need to be peaceful, loving, kind, joy. The beauty in our story as Christians, we can't forget the message of the gospel and the horrific story of God who had to bring his only son to earth because of that. And just one last comment was in the verse which I hear so often in this context is being in the world but not of the world. And I think we skip over the in and go to the but of, but not of. And I think that's where we get to be the feeling of looking over some of these things. So I appreciate that
Thank you.
your message cannot cover all of that.
Right.
And I know that that's partly part of how you have researched and what you know.
Yeah.
But that's just the comments I
Yeah,
wanted to
that's
leave with
excellent. Thank you. Sorry, so the first, there's so many good thoughts there. The first thing you raised, well, I'm sorry, I just slipped it for a second. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I completely agree, and I did not mean to gloss over that difference. I mean, I think there's certainly a difference between the Roman Empire and a modern democratic state or republic states that we have. Of course, a lot of people throughout history and now are in situations that are more like the Roman imperial one. But absolutely, like we do have a responsibility to vote, and I tried to say that we have responsibilities to stand up and to do things and to be active. I didn't mean to indicate the opposite of that. I still think there is some core principles of how we show up, even in the midst of that. That's what I was trying to get at, not to say, in fact, what I tried to say is, there's not a one-size-fits-all in what this looks like, but what are the core principles? That's what I was trying to get at, But thank you for that. That's something I should have been more clear on. So the second one, I don't know why I'm not losing. You had great thoughts.
Daisy chain.
Yeah, the daisy. Yeah, gosh. I guess I thought I was saying not that either, in the sense of like inviting people into kingdom life. That's what I mean by this is the picture of it is not just make love not war or something kind of thing. It is a call to invite people to enter into a community that lives according to God's kingdom now and in the future. So it is a very specific call, and I didn't mean to diminish that if I did. So I completely agree. If I understand what you're saying, it's not just like of a generic piece. It's a call to invitation to kingdom life. Thank you.
Jonathan, we now have 4 people waiting with questions. So maybe just one question to start with over here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. You said that we shouldn't get worked up too much about problems but deeply involved in everyday life, into loving our neighbor. But it's not so easy not to get worked up sometimes. I mean, 2 weeks ago we had a course here on climate change and storytelling. And I have the feeling that sometimes it would be good if we got worked up a bit more. I mean, sometimes people can get quite complacent, or they... I mean, I get cross. When people say, climate change is not caused by the whole carbon stuff, but it's caused by the sun. That's what the Trump administration says at the moment. It's the sun. It's not what us polluting the air. I think that's awful. And is it bad to get worked up about this stuff? Which, sorry, I think it's just not right. And I think we should get worked up.
Yeah, thank you.
Jonathan, would you care to address that?
Yeah,
This
now
tension.
I'm worked up about that question, right? No, thank you. Yeah, and this is what's so great about dialogue, because, it gives us a chance to kind of clarify and also receive, disagreement too. But I completely agree. And my main point is that it's a habit of life that will shape us. If we give ourselves constantly to being worked up about things, that becomes a way of inhabiting the world that is not what we're designed for. There is a time for a prophetic voice. There is a time for getting worked about. So there's a time to stand up. There's a time to be politically active. And I'm, certainly tipping my hat to that. But what I'm concerned about is a way of inhabiting the world that shapes us deeply. And you can get so, there's always something to be worked up about. And the question is that, what does that really do to us as people? Let me kind of come at it another way. One of the things I've observed in the last 10 years or so is the greatest virtue, it seems, which isn't really a virtue in society, is indignation. Have you noticed that? It's kind of that's the thing that is most honored, is that when somebody's indignant about something, and that's what gets all. And I just think, there's a place for indignance, for sure, but that's not actually a virtue. Indignance is not a virtue. It's not a fruit of the Spirit, right? The fruit of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. And again, that's not to say there's not a time for standing up and activism. I'm not saying that. But there's a difference between being active and standing up for things and giving ourselves to activism, which I think shapes us in a way that is not what we're made for. So I'm trying to have a balance there. So I do appreciate the dialogue. I really do. Thank you for that.
This gentleman here, thank you.
Yep.
I think you've probably already answered this, but I'm just curious how you fit global into that.
Yeah.
As Christians, we believe going to the world and sharing the gospel. And I know you're speaking to us. I've got a life, I live here. But how would you fit that into maybe your church and maybe into that certain part of your life? Where does global fit in, and reaching and sharing and compassion
Absolutely.
to those that are in need?
And nationally too, yeah. So when I emphasize locality, being radically local, again, trying to be nuanced here and say it's not all that we do, but it is amazing how much we can love people in the abstract, right? I think of, C.S. Lewis talks this way, Chesterton talks this way, Dickens. I've just been rereading David Copperfield. He brings this up as well, that there are some people, and we can be guilty of this too, that we love the idea of loving people, but we really don't like our neighbor, right? And that's something that we should pay attention to, and that's what I was trying to get at. Now, I think my kind of theory is that when we give ourselves to radically doing good in our local communities, some people and some opportunities will happen for that to expand. So maybe use the Garden of Eden as an example. You tend the garden that's in front of you, and then sometimes in some people that will end up being a national tending and maybe even an international tending. But I think the sequence of it has to be that. In other words, you can't start with this abstraction of international and national problems if you're not actually cultivating your own place. That's how I'd say it. But again, it's so nuanced because I'm not saying there aren't people that are called to that. I hope you hear that. I'm just trying to get the order of operations here that we really focus on the local, I think, to start. Thank you, though. Excellent question. These are so good. Thank you for these great questions.
I'm going to go with the young lady up here. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for
Welcome.
what you had to say. I really appreciated the bit-by-bit part.
Good.
I'm studying art history.
Great.
And I really appreciated the building beautiful things, but I find especially in modern culture, the definition of something beautiful is really nebulous. So I was curious if you had a definition that you ascribe to.
Definition of beauty. Yeah, that's good. I've read a lot on that. My wife's a professional artist. Our son is a professional oil painter. So there's all of our family is either musicians or visual artists, which means a lot of passion and no money in our lives, right, as I always say. So I care very much, and I do, in my classes, I usually do a ton of sacred art. I love all that. I mean, I personally think there's something to objectivity and beauty. You know, I'm actually quite open to many modern art abstractions as well, but I do think there is something objective to beauty, but defining beauty is difficult. I mean, I mentioned in my class this morning, one of the great theologians of it would be von Balthasar, who talks about a lot of stuff about beauty, but one of the images that I love is that beauty is the residue of God's glory in the earth. And so things that reflect truth, goodness, and beauty, things that reflect the way the world is designed, I think, is a big part of what beauty is, you know. But it's, you know, philosophically, that's like a massive conversation that I'm not an expert in. But I mean, I have some knowledge of it, but not an expert. But I think of it as according with reality as God is designed. Is the manifestation of beauty. And I meant to say this, I skipped it in my notes, but building beautiful things includes building beautiful businesses, building beautiful pieces of art, building beautiful marriages, building beautiful friendships. I mean, it's being on the search for beauty and just crafting things with excellence, you know, is excellence in love, excellence in craftsmanship, all of the aspects of what it means to be human. I think that's at the core of what it means to be human, is to pursue excellence and beauty. But it's still maybe a little abstract, sorry. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm jealous. I wish I were an art history major. If I could go back, I'd do that myself. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Or crafting a beautiful answer. So well done.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Given our time, and Pablo has an online question, and then there's two more people at the mics. I think we'll allow these three to be our final three, unless these three are very short. So
Yes.
Let's go Pablo with the online question, and then we'll finish up with the two folks here at the top. Thank you.
Yes, we do have an online question, and it's also related to your point, build beautiful things.
Okay.
Rachel asks, do you have any general terroir recommendations on how to invite the world to recognize God's hand in creation as opposed to man-achieved intelligence or man-achieved advancement? So this is terroir recommendations.
Yeah. Not sure how the terroir, I love that terroir idea. I'm not sure, maybe I'm not totally getting the question, but I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I guess I don't think of God's creation and humanity's creation in competition. And maybe that's not what's being said, but in other words, I think our creating activity, I think to be made in the image of God means a lot. Theologians talk about the many different things that could mean, and it does mean a lot of different things. I think the being a creator, in our case, as Tolkien would call it, a sub-creator, is at the very core of what it means to be made in the image of God. And so I don't view all the things that we make, airplanes and Mona Lisas and beautiful marriages and whatever, I don't see those as in any way in competition with God. I think it is part of God's work in the world. But maybe I'm not getting at the question. Sorry. Maybe you can help me, Pablo. Or
I think this is a good answer because it is clearly recognize God's hand in creation versus man-achieved intelligence. So if it is not in competition,
I think
as you said,
all the good and true and beautiful things that humans create are, even non-Christian humans, of course, are the image of God manifested in the world. And that's why I try to live my life looking for beauty. You know, I'm looking for beauty everywhere, in all kinds of things humans create.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you. There's the phrase, kingdom of priests and children of the resurrection. The thing about priests is that they stand between two people, God and man.
Yeah.
You've been talking about what we can do to live, and particularly in the non-anxious presence. But I found it considerably noteworthy that there was no discussion about what God is doing in the world. And some of the things he is doing are, if we follow our news wisely, we can get quite a shock and quite a support, and it helps us to be non-anxious. For me, the archetypical story is what happened when the Soviet Union fell without firing a shot. It happens that a Christian friend of mine was a student of Russian here at UBC at the time. And one day he made some extra money translating for some VIP visitors. Among the other places these people went to was the Canadian Bible Society, where they placed an order for enough Bibles for every man and woman in the Russian armed forces. And the senior visitor of that trio was a gentleman named Nikolai Stelyarov, who was then the chairman of the KGB. So, I'm wondering, okay, how would you see God moving? But the other side of this is that oftentimes when we have to act as priests to man, we find man troubled by somebody else's activities. And that is, how do we cope with the activities of the devil? So those are the two questions I would like to see answered.
Yeah, so thank you for pointing out, again, this, I really appreciate the dialogue from everybody. Yeah, and maybe that was a wrong thing to just assume and not state enough, but you're absolutely right. I mean, our priestly activity is God's activity in the world, so I appreciate you kind of putting a exclamation point on that. I think that's really good. The second question was what again?
The work of the devil.
The first question was not so much our activity as priests, but God's activities apart from us that can sometimes encourage us.
That's right.
How can you see examples of that? The second question is, of course, how can we help people identify and deal with and stay non-anxious presence in the midst of satanic activity in the world?
Yeah, I don't think I probably have a very profound answer for that, beyond what I tried to hint at, that I think, the discernment is a spiritual activity as well, but I think the hope in the resurrection age is the main way of fighting that fear. And I'll just say, even as I was speaking tonight and as I've reflected on these issues, I'm very aware that I'm speaking from a pretty privileged place, right? Like, I'm not persecuted in any significant way. I live in a country with a lot of freedom. And so I'm really aware that a critique might be, it's easy for you to say to be a kingdom of priests because you're not facing persecution. I receive that. I still think that there is this mere Christian engagement with the world that you see in the scriptures and through the history, even with different kinds of environments, where there's still this posture of patience and engagement with the world, even in the midst of satanic activity against it, And I know it's easy for me to say that because I haven't experienced what many people have, but I still think there's a mere Christian engagement, and no matter what heat we're facing. So, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Carla, the last question belongs to you.
All right, bring it home.
So maybe we can talk about this more in class, but
Sure.
how do we have the confidence to be kingdom priests? How do we know how to tap into that in our daily, ordinary lives so that we own that as part of our calling?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think the Children of the Resurrection Age is part of that. To get more personal, I do a lot of counseling, and I could do counseling with you right now. Just kidding. I do a lot of counseling, and one of the primary questions I ask people is, "What are you afraid of?" You know, and just kind of creating a safe space where we can just really be honest, like, what am I afraid of? Because there's a lot of our energy and activity that is motivated by, well, I think all of our negative experiences are motivated by one or a combination of three things: fear, shame, and grief. And I think those three primary negative emotions drive so much of our problems in our lives. And I think learning to slow down and pay attention and to really just ask yourself, like, what am I really afraid of? Or am I ashamed of something? Or what am I grieving over? I was just in a counseling session the other night with some people from church, and that was the question I asked, and it really cracked open. Like, there's the kind of circumstances, but then it's really getting underneath why are we showing up the way we are? And it's actually not really the circumstances. There's something underneath that we need to pay attention to. And I think that's a big part of the step of how to be non-anxious, to start being really honest, like, what am I afraid of here? And then kind of open that door in light of God's presence and his confidence. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you being present with us here at Regent College and online. Thank you for your good, thoughtful questions. And maybe your questions weren't answered as fulsome as you would have liked, but Jonathan is still going to be around at the bookstore if you wish to engage him for a little bit without hogging all of his time, so that he can meet as many of you as possible and sign those books that you're going to buy, right?
As I always say, I don't care if you read the book as long as you buy it. That's just what you remember.
So we're grateful for your speaking tonight, grateful for your presence and your questions. We're also very grateful for our supporters around the world who make it possible. Jonathan, you can't leave until one last thing at the end. You can stand up there. You don't have to, just don't leave. But just don't leave the auditorium. If you care to be part of that global community that supports the work of Regent College, to make sure that we continue to offer these free evening public lectures every summer, as you go out, there's a donation box. Feel free to drop some cash in there. If you don't carry cash, and a lot of people don't, you can take that phone and you can put your ringer back on, by the way, and you can just type in rgnt.net/give, and you can give online. This lecture and every lecture this summer will be available on our YouTube channel. This lecture itself will be available within the next 24 hours, but if you go to our YouTube channel tonight, just Google Regent College YouTube, you'll find all the lectures that have happened so far this spring and summer. They'll all be there on the YouTube channel through the end of August. So this is your month to watch those. If you see one you like, or tonight's, and you want to forward that link to a friend, that would be a great thing for you to do. That would be a way to bless them, right, Jonathan? Right. Could I just tell you about 3 public things happening in the next week to which you're invited? You can come right back here to this room at 11:45 tomorrow morning. It'll be our weekly summer chapel, 11:45 to 12:30. You are welcome to join us for worship. Wednesday at 12 noon in room 100, which is just across the hallway here, will be our Wednesday noontime conversations, this week featuring Dr. John Owen, who is here teaching on Christianity and politics. So there's some resonance with what John is teaching, with what Jonathan has shared tonight, and it's just a politics Q&A. And John said he might have the questions for you. So it's not necessarily you have the questions and he has the answers, but come for a time of conversation around politics and Christianity Wednesday at 12 noon. And then lastly, we will gather back here for our next evening public lecture 1 week from tonight, Monday, July 28th, here at 7:30. Dr. George Kalantzis will be speaking on migration and refugees and the rehumanizing role of the church. A very worthwhile lecture. You would do well to come and be a part of that, or to watch it online if you're no longer in the Vancouver area. Well, Jonathan, you have blessed us tonight with your knowledge, your learning, your reading of the scriptures, the things that are happening in your life and in your church. So we want to say thank you for blessing us. And now I'm going to invite all of us to bless Jonathan in a very simple human way, and that is just with a very warm round of applause. So Jonathan, thank you and bless you. And the Lord bless you, the children of the resurrection. Bless you, priests of our kingdom, as you go to your homes and your communities to bless those around you. So good night. God bless. See you again soon.